the 100 best books of the 21st century. Now, in the past week or so, a lot of you sent me this list, the New York Times' list of the 100 best books of the 21st century. You asked me if I could have a look at it and possibly comment on it. And well, since I feel that I have to make amends for this video, why not? And I must say, this has proven to be a very interesting list. Now, first of all, this list is a list that the New York Times people did not make themselves. Now, in the past, I already talked about how the New York Times doesn't always have the most sincere and the most correct way of compiling their lists. If you have not seen that video yet and you don't know what I'm talking about, you can always find it here. But this list is completely different. In fact, this list and some of the books that are in it, even its number one, have surprised the people at the New York Times themselves. Now, it soon became clear that this was quite a video project, so I will be going over some of my overall general thoughts on this list and how they did it, what's in it, some trends that I see, and then we'll dive into the top 10. I'm going to go through the top 10 book by book very quickly, not going to do full reviews because I haven't read all of them. I have read quite some, but not all. And we'll just discover them together. The 100 best books of the 21st century. So far, let's go. Now, before we dive in, I will say that I will link a lot of extra material down in the description. I will link the original list with all of the 100 books. I will link the accompanying podcast, and you can just peruse all of that if you feel so inclined at your own pace and time. First of all, how did they create this list? They have polled 500 people that are professionals in the world of literature, in the world of writing and publishing. There are writers on there, poets, journalists, publishers, critics, you name it. People that are working in literature have been given the opportunity to just send in their top 10 of the books they thought that were the best of the 21st century so far. And this makes for some really strange, yet somehow predictable results. And first of all, which is a bit of a curveball to some, is the decision to include both fiction and non-fiction books. And in the podcast, they claim that, well, we felt that this was such a big project that we had just one go at it, so we couldn't do just a fiction and a non-fiction version. We had to just chuck it all in one pile. Now, personally, I'm not against mingling the two up. I do the same in my own top 10 or top 20 lists of books that I've read that year. So there is not a problem with that, but for some people it feels strange. And I get it. For me, it all comes down to the definition of the word best. What do you mean by the best books of the 21st century? If you interpret the word best as the most influential, the most talked about, the most recommended to your friends, yeah, well, then by all means mix up fiction and non-fiction. But if you mean the most gripping, the most moving, the book that just kept on living rent-free in your head for ages, then I say that fiction will always have the upper hand on non-fiction. And that is reflected in this list as well. There are 26 non-fiction books in total in this list, which is about a quarter of all the books included. And these non-fiction books are mostly memoirs, biographies, some true crime. Nothing really surprising there. These numbers do reflect, do mirror what we see in book sales all over the world for many years now. So yeah, non-fiction is but a small part of this much bigger list. Another thing that struck me right away when I was perusing this list is that there are not many real genre books on it. There are hardly any fantasy books, there are hardly any sci-fi books. There is some mystery, but it is all more or less literary fiction. The one genre that seems to have gotten on top of all the others is dystopia. There are quite a few dystopian books on there. There's The Road by Cormac McCarthy, there is Station 11. Books like that seem to be very popular at the moment. Now, read into that whatever you want. Is it a sign that this century is not going all that well? Well, you decide and let me know down in the comments. Now, on the overrepresentation of literary fiction, it somehow felt that people mostly included the books that they thought you had to include. The books that feel serious, that feel literary, the books that are Booker Prize or Pulitzer material. I felt there is a distinct lack of books that you would read for pleasure, for fun. Another thing that struck me is that some authors clearly suffer from self-sabotage. If you take someone like Susanna Clarke, and on the one hand you have Strange and Norrell, on the other hand you have Piranesi, and I can easily see how many people would include the one or the other, and in the end she isn't in the list. I think those two books cancelled each other out, and you see that with a lot of authors. I would have expected someone like Stephen King to have more books in this list, but when you publish a new book almost every year, then you become your own worst competition. So yeah, I do feel that there is this almost self-sabotage bias where authors cancel themselves out. But in the end, I must say I didn't have much to complain about. I didn't have much beef with how they compiled this list. It seems to be something very different from what they normally do. And of course, no methodology is flawless. But this is a very interesting and decent list. Now, before we dive into the top 10, I will say do have a listen to the podcast if you're into that. There the people of the New York Times themselves explain a lot of their thoughts, a lot of their own favorites, books they think are lacking, a lot of their surprises. It is a really interesting interview, round table talk about how they see the list that they've compiled. And before we get to it, to spill some tea, some of the ballots, some of the choices that authors and other people made have been made public. And I will say they gave us some very interesting insights. And I will leave you with one, and that is apparently Stephen King getting a lot of backlash because he, without blinking, included one of his own books in his top 10. But enough of that now, let's dive into the top 10 of best books of the 21st century. At number 10 we have Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. Now, I have not read this book, I know of this book, and I will say it is the only Marilynne Robinson book in this list, which is a bit of a surprise. I mean, she has written a lot of novels in the last decades or so, which have all been very well received, which sold very, very well, and well, it is kind of strange to see there is only one Marilynne Robinson book in this list. But hey, at least Gilead made it in. Can't comment much on it because I haven't read it yet, but well, hey, number 10, good spot, well done. And then at number 9 we have Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. Now, on the podcast, they described this book as the most subtle, the most quiet dystopian book of all, and I do agree. I absolutely love this book. But I'm not going to tell you a lot about it because this is one of those books that the less you know when you go in reading it, the better your experience will be. So I'm not going to review it, I'm not going to tell you what it is all about. You just have to go out and read it and experience it for yourself. You'll have to trust the reputation of Kazuo Ishiguro, who of course wrote books like Remainders of the Day, and you'll just have to trust my opinion of it. Just go out and give it a go, do try it. I guarantee you, you'll love it. And Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro at number 9. At number 8 we have Austerlitz by W.G. Sebald. This is the only W.G. Sebald book I have ever read, and I must say I'm glad to see it here. Austerlitz is historical fiction. It is the story of a young boy, a young child who gets deported, gets transported to Wales without knowing where he comes from, whom his mother was, who his father was. It just gets dropped into this new family, adopted on a background of a world war. And we see him grow up. And as he grows up, questions start to arise. He starts to yearn for his identity, and he decides to travel to retraces all of these footsteps and see if he can unearth his origins, his background, his identity. It is a very interesting story. It is an emotional story, but don't get me wrong, Austerlitz is not an easy read. The story itself is told by Austerlitz to some unknown narrator, someone we never see, we never get to meet, and well, that makes for a very strange disconnection between the narrator and the story. Maybe this narrator is Sebald himself, we don't know, but it does make for some difficult reading at times. I found myself having to go back to reread portions and check things and who was who, and well, it is not an easy read. It is a book that requires a lot of concentration, but once you get into it, it does become a very mesmerizing story, a very noteworthy story, and I did love it in the end. So yeah, Austerlitz by W.G. Sebald at number 8 in our top 10 100 best books of the 21st century. And then at number 7 we have The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, and yes, absolutely all the yeses, I love this book. This is again historical fiction. It is the story of Cora, a young black woman who is kept as a slave on a plantation, and this plantation is a place of nightmares, a place you do not want to be. All of the abuse, the torture, you are just a thing, and she decides to escape. Now this is of course where the Underground Railroad comes in, and the whole voyage, the whole journey that Cora undertakes with all of the dangers en route almost becomes like the Odyssey, and it is a story of trying to get home, to get to safety, to get to a place of one's own. There's also the character of Ridgway, whom is a slave hunter, someone who just ventures out and tries to capture runaway slaves. So yeah, it is a thrilling read, it is interesting, it is intellectual, it ticked all of my boxes. I'm very happy to see this one in here this high, The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead at number 7. And then at number 6 we have 2666 by Roberto Bolano. And I will say I have not read this book, and I will even admit to not knowing anything about it. So this is a big surprise for me. This book, for me at least, comes out of nowhere, just into the top 10, and no idea what it is about. So if you have read it, if you have heard about it, let me know down below in the comments. I will happily hear whatever you have to tell about it, because I'm drawing a blank here. At number 6, 2666 by Roberto Bolano. And we enter our top 5 at number 5 with The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. And I will say, this is a big surprise. I haven't read this one, and there is a very good reason for it, because all of the things I heard about this book were bad. I never bothered picking it up because all of the people I heard, all of the reviews I read, just advised against doing so. So yeah, this is quite a surprise, a big surprise for me. I am very curious now. Should I read it? Is it worth your time? Is it a dud like many people say? If you have read it, let me know down below in the comments, because I am dying to know. Should I give this one a chance or just stay away from it? At number 5, The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. Then at number 4 we have The Known World by Edward P. Jones. And this one is on my TBR. I have a copy here somewhere, seem to have misplaced it somewhere around the house, but I own this one, haven't read it just yet, but seeing it scoring this high confirms all of my hopes, and I will bump it up a few notches on my TBR, because yeah, this one seems promising. And again, historical fiction. This is the story of a former slave, who escapes, who gets his freedom, and he starts to work his own farm. Makes sure that he is never gets in trouble with the law, that everything is in order, and then he suddenly dies. And his wife takes over the farm and everything goes to shambles. And again we have this alternate history, historical fiction type of novel, talking about a past of slavery, which seems to be very popular in the last few years, in the last decade. This book won a Pulitzer, it is said to be daring, it is said to be complex, and I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, this is one of the books that you will probably see pop up in one of my future videos once I finally get on top of that TBR and get on top of this one, The Known World by Edward P. Jones. And then we enter our top 3. And again, it's historical fiction. It is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, and yes, absolutely, totally agree, absolutely, no complaints. I loved Wolf Hall, and I will even go as far as to say that Hilary Mantel reinvented what we call historical fiction today. This is the first book in the Thomas Cromwell series. There's 3 books, if I am not mistaken, and it is all about UK history. The king has died without a male heir, and all of a sudden there's chaos. There are a lot of noble families that are sparring for their candidates to become the next ruler, and the country is going to shambles. Now again, this is the first book in a trilogy, and I will say that Wolf Hall is not necessarily the best of 3. I thought the last one in the series, The Mirror and the Light, was the better of the 3, and the story just builds up to that climax in the 3rd book, and yeah, absolutely, I'm here for it, I'm a fan. These are big books, I think 500 plus pages on most of them. They are books that I would only recommend to fans of the historical fiction genre. If you're not into history, then don't bother, but if you are, and you haven't read these yet, yeah, do give them a chance. Wolf Hall, Hilary Mantel at number 3. I totally agree, I'm here for it. At number 2 we find the highest ranking non-fiction book. And I will say this is a bit of a surprise. I did not expect to see a non-fiction book score this high. This is The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. And I think I know why this book scores this high, because this is one of those non-fiction books that actually reads like fiction. This is the story of one of those untold stories of American history, the Great Migration. Now between 1915 and I guess the 70s or so, a lot of people would just journey across the USA in search of a new home, of a job, of a place to settle down. And it changed how the country looks today. And this influx of people would change how cities look like. This is in fact where ghettos come from. And although this is a non-fiction book and Isabel Wilkerson gathered a lot of new data and a lot of new insights through more than 1,000 interviews, but the clever thing she does is that she takes, I think 3 of those cases, 3 individuals, and she tells their story. And all of a sudden this is no longer a book about demographics, a book about statistics or history. No, this becomes very personal and very emotional. These 3 stories are inspirational, they are sad, they are hopeful, they are relatable at times. These are just 3 totally different people from totally different backgrounds that have decided they want a better life for themselves and for their kids. And yes, I do believe that we are going to see this type of fictional, non-fiction, I don't know how to call it, but we're going to see a lot more of it, because this, in my opinion, is the way of selling non-fiction to fiction readers. The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. Again, if you're into history, if you are into social history and social justice, do give it a try. I mean, this was, at least for me, a totally unknown piece of American history, and I found it really, really interesting. And then for our number one. Yes, at number one, the best book of the 21st century, at least according to 500 people that were polled, is My Brilliant Friends by Elena Ferrante. And again, this is a total surprise to me, and not just to me. In the podcast, they expressed their own surprise of seeing this book this high at number one. And I think the thing that surprised me most is seeing a translated book at number one. I would have expected to see an original English book here. And they do mention in the podcast that the translator of this book, Anne Goldstein, which is a quite very well-known and very decent translator, that she has actually lifted the whole work up to an even higher standard than it already was. So yeah, here we are, My Brilliant Friend, the first book in a quartet in a series of 4 books, better known as the Neapolitan novels, and I have read this first part. Haven't read the others, but I have read this one. And again, a form of historical fiction. This book, or in fact the 4 books, because the author herself, Ferrante, says that you should see it as one continuous story which spans over the lifetime of 2 girls. 2 girls from the Italian countryside. They are quite clever but come from a poor background, and they decide to become the best of friends. Now, a lot of things will happen during their lives. There are a lot of political, historical events on a background of Italy nearing the Second World War, and this book spans all over that lifetime, all over these events. So yeah, might continue this series somewhere in the future, perhaps this winter, we'll see, but for now it is our number one, apparently the best book of the 21st century. Let me know if you agree or disagree down below in the comments. Do let me know which would be your pick as the best book of the 21st century. Did you agree with number one? Did you agree with our top 10? Are there books you missed? Again, let me know down below in the comments. I will talk 21st century books some more. Thank you to everyone who sent in this list to me. I always love it when you engage with content like this, and if you have any ideas, any things you would see in a future video, by all means, do let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Do leave a like, do leave a comment, and if you are wanting for some other great bookish content, well, that's easy. All you have to do is watch this video.